Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Thursday, December the 12th, 2024. Today there is quite a tight configuration going on involving the Sun, Venus and Mars. So to be precise, we've got a Venus-Mars opposition, which I've been talking about for the last few days, and also the Sun is sesquiquadrate Mars. So Sun, Venus and Mars is kind of all together, and I do think this is important. And in terms of the thumbnail, I've put a few people who I think might be impacted by this configuration. And I've also put a picture of Mars in just to make the point that it is an event in which Mars is closely involved. But before I consider this configuration, I want to look at the astrology and I Ching for today, which is Thursday, December the 12th, 2024. As always, if you enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. And if you are not subscribed, I would be super grateful if you were to subscribe. Also, don't be afraid to comment, even if you hate this video, you want to tell me how awful it is, just feel free. I do appreciate comments, regardless of whether or not you're positive or negative about my content. Anyway, let's look at what's happening today. So here is the picture of the planets for noon today, New York time, and you can see that the moon is in the middle of Taurus. So yesterday there was an issue about whether the moon was in Aries or Taurus, and it depended on your time zone. But now we can say for sure that the moon is in Taurus, and so it's a sign which, of course, is very stable, at least in isolation, and it's a fixed sign. It's an Earth sign, and it's also in its exaltation. So it's a nice place for the moon to be in. Yet the moon does make some aspects of note. The moon is aspecting Venus and Mars. Okay, that's kind of at the beginning of the day. So the moon is sort of separating from a square aspect to Venus and Mars. So that's one thing going on. And also the moon is making a sextile to Saturn. Now, this Venus-Mars opposition, I believe, is an important event. And when you think about Venus and Mars, you often think about relationships and male and female, Venus representing female, Mars and representing the male principle. So when they're opposed to one another, there may be a clash, perhaps a clash of genders. Men and women don't necessarily get on with each other, but there is also a certain sense of attraction with Venus-Mars, and it may be a very dynamic attraction, an attraction that is born of a certain amount of tension. And that might be exciting, but it could also be somewhat challenging. And what is interesting about this Venus-Mars opposition is that it is very much tied up with the Sun. And if you look, we've got the Sun semi-square Venus. So this is an ongoing aspect, Sun semi-square Venus, because the Sun and Venus are roughly going at the same speed. So once they're in aspect, they kind of stay in aspect. And it takes a long time for that aspect to break up. Venus will be going ever so slightly faster than the Sun. So over time it will break up. But at the moment, that's about Sun-Venus semi-square is very close. And the Sun is also sesquiquadrate Mars. That's 135 degrees of a circle. So, when you're dealing with semi-squares and sesquiquadrates, you're dealing with the number 8. Sort of a semi-square is an eighth of a circle, sesquiquadrate 3/8 of a circle, and a semi-square is half a square. So it's a dynamic aspect. And so with Sun sesquiquadrate Mars, it's rather like Sun square Mars. And so you've got these two male planets, Sun and Mars, making a stressful aspect of one another. So that could make things somewhat tense. And I suppose in certain cases it could be violent. I mean, I suppose not necessarily affecting us as individuals, but the world at large. And so we need all the stability we can get, and perhaps that takes us back to the moon in Taurus. Now, at the beginning of the day, the moon was kind of making a T-square. Moon square Venus, moon square Mars. But the moon is also making a sextile to Saturn, moon at 15 Taurus, Saturn at 13 Pisces. So that moon sextile Saturn is perhaps somewhat welcome. It sort of helps to calm things down a little. So you can see moon 15 Taurus at noon New York. If we take that back and look at, say Sydney, just to give you an idea of the difference between Australia, New Zealand and the Americas, here's a chart for Sydney, Australia. And you can see at noon, Sydney, Australia, the moon is actually at 5 degrees Taurus. So that T-square, moon square Venus, moon square Mars, is exact at noon in Sydney, Australia. So if you are in Australasia, I think you're going to get that T-square and all of that tension between moon hitting Venus, moon hitting Mars, far more than if you are, say, for example, in the Americas. I mean, it is exciting, it is dynamic, but I think you have to be careful with that. It's moon square Mars in particular can be quite an angry combination, and it's highly charged as well, and there is a certain sexuality to that T-square. That has to be, because Venus and Mars are involved and Moon is involved, and Moon in Taurus is quite a sensual placing for the Moon. So I suppose it in terms of relationships, it could be useful if you're trying to form a new relationship, if you're trying to attract someone, but it's quite a dangerous configuration, I would have said. So turning to the heliocentric picture, here that's of course putting the Sun at the center of the solar system. So here it is. So that's the heliocentric picture. The Earth is making a sextile to Chiron, and I would have thought that's a pretty gentle aspect of Earth sextile Chiron, and you'll get it for the next 24 hours, probably into tomorrow as well. Earth sextile Chiron. I think it perhaps allows us to be different, but in such a way that doesn't rock the boat, maybe. And if we want to do things perhaps that other people aren't expecting, now might be our chance to do it. But we don't want to take things too far. So that's one thing to consider. And anything else? The Earth is making a square to Saturn. It's separating from a square to Saturn, but it's still in orb. And I suppose you could say Earth sextile Saturn at the same time as we've got Moon sextile Saturn geocentrically. It may be that the Earth square Saturn perhaps provides a stabilizing influence, but it also may be that we feel that things aren't kind of moving quite as quickly as we would like them to be. And of course, also Jupiter is sesquiquadrate Pluto. I've talked about this on a pretty daily basis, but if briefly, I think I'll be talking about it tomorrow, the Jupiter sesquiquadrate Pluto in detail, but the broad principle of Jupiter sesquiquadrate Pluto is self-improvement, and there is Jupiter sesquiquadrate Pluto geocentrically as well. So it is a good time to make things better, and we should not be satisfied with second best. So let's now move to my forecast for the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Thursday, December the 12th, 2024. Aries. Aries, there is now an opposition between Venus and Mars, and it's exact. And this Venus-Mars opposition, in a way, puts you in the spotlight. And also, we've got the Sun sesquiquadrate Mars. So, Sun is making a sesquiquadrate to Mars. That's 135-degree aspect, 3/8 of a circle. So, you feel under a certain amount of pressure. Or perhaps it's a case of you feeling you have to put other people under pressure. I don't think you want to. You like to take things in a fairly happy-go-lucky way. You want to be spontaneous, and you just want to be free to do whatever you want to do. But today, there is something about you that is tense, and I think that other people are picking up on this. And if things aren't moving fast enough, you're going to want to make them move. And you may feel that there is a certain amount of urgency. And perhaps because the moon is in Taurus, you're going to be quite stubborn. I mean, Aries is not a stubborn sign. You could argue that actually Aries is the least stubborn of the 12 signs. It doesn't like to stay in one place. But with moon in Taurus, also moon making square aspects to Venus and Mars, that does put the pressure on you, and it forces you perhaps to put the pressure on other people. And as a result, Aries, you might be perceived as being hard work, not an easy person to have around. And I'm wondering if there's much you can do about it. I think you have to make a special effort to consider how you are occurring to other people, and that particularly applies to the people who are important to you. I mean, if someone is not important to you, they're just passing through your life. You have a 5-minute interaction with them, but it doesn't really matter if you offend them or upset them. But if people are important to you, there just may be something about you that causes a little bit of upset. And so you try as hard as you possibly can to be diplomatic and to try to understand the other person's point of view. Now, one thing that might be of concern to you, and I know you perhaps don't want it to be of concern to you, is money. And that is because the moon is in Taurus, and it's not just money, it's about what you have, and you're thinking about this perhaps more than you'd like to think about it, but you are aware of your resources, or perhaps your lack of resources as well. And this might bother you. It's true that the moon is square Mars. And so with moon square Mars, especially at the beginning of the day, especially if you're in Australia or New Zealand, with that moon square Mars, financial matters can make you annoyed. And, once you get annoyed about something, it's going to be difficult to unwind. So do try to get money in perspective. And I understand you've got to take money seriously. Sometimes Aries doesn't take money seriously enough. So there is a certain sense of balance there. But if you take money seriously, make sure you don't take things too far. Also, I should point out that the moon is making an opposition to true black moon Lilith. And so with the moon opposition, true black moon Lilith, there's a certain scope there for jealousy. Who's got what? Who hasn't got what? Feeling that someone's got something you want, or it could be the other way around. someone being jealous of you. But there may be, with Moon opposition true Black Moon Lilith, certain issues of jealousy and competition, which maybe are not particularly useful. So to end on a sort of a positive note, the Moon in Taurus is making a sextile to Saturn. And so we've got Saturn in Pisces, Moon in Taurus. So those two signs, Saturn and Pisces, on either side of Aries. Pisces is a sign before Aries. Taurus is a sign after Aries. So with Moon sextile Saturn, that may give you an opportunity to calm things down and get things in perspective. And I think that's going to be important. So if you do feel jealous or resentful, or you feel that you haven't got something, someone else has got it, Moon sextile Saturn allows you to sort of step back and sort of consider what it's all about. And then you can get perspective and you can be more relaxed about it. So that's perhaps what you're trying to achieve. And the main thing, Aries, is really do consider how you're coming across. I mean, I know you may be trying very hard to be reasonable, but it may not be enough. Just consider how you might possibly be making things worse if you have the wrong attitude. Taurus, the moon is now very much in your sign. It's in the middle of Taurus, and so that has got to be good news, because the moon is not just in your sign; it's exalted in Taurus, and so that does make you feel comfortable, and you're feeling at one with your material environment. And so that's certainly good news. But there may be threats to your comfort, or at least you might perceive there as being threats. So the moon makes a square to Mars, and it makes a square to Venus. Now, those aspects are going to be especially strong towards the beginning of the day, and they're going to be especially strong if you happen to be in Australia or New Zealand. I think everyone is going to feel those aspects, but I think there are going to be some people who are going to feel them more than others, and timing is going to be important. So if you're in the Americas, Moon square Mars, Moon square Venus, it's not going to be such a big issue unless you're up really early in the morning. But it's still there to an extent. So, we've got a lot of planets in fixed signs. I mean, that's what it's about, really. Moon square Mars. Mars is in Leo, a fixed sign. Moon square Venus. Venus is in Aquarius, a fixed sign. Moon, of course, is in Taurus, which is a fixed sign. And, of course, you are fixed. And you like to do things in a particular way. Okay, you might try to be flexible, but I think at the moment you are quite set in your ways, and that could be a problem if something comes along to disrupt your routine, or there's a suggestion that you should do things differently, or maybe there's a sudden event which you just hadn't planned for, and that could just throw you off, and it could be quite difficult to get your bearings back. So whatever you're doing, don't assume that everything is going to turn out in a particular way, because it might not, and you must be ready for a change. And of course the moon eventually will make a conjunction to Uranus. I'm not saying that you necessarily can feel that moon conjunct Uranus right now, but it's there, it's gathering strength. And so with moon conjunct Uranus, there is a possibility that you get thrown off your path by something you just hadn't fully counted for. And the main aspect today would be Venus opposition Mars. And Venus opposition Mars, it's an aspect I've been talking about for some time. It's been getting closer and closer, and now it is exact. And with Venus opposition Mars, there is tension, and this Venus-Mars opposition can be relevant to relationships because, Venus is your ruler, Mars rules Scorpio, which is your opposite sign, and this Venus-Mars opposition just may remind you of the differences between you and other people. It's an opposition, and an opposition can highlight some very major differences. And William Lilly, William Lilly, the 17th century astrologer, he was actually a Taurus. And he said, the square is perfect enmity, the opposition is perfect hatred. I mean, I'm not saying Venus opposition Mars is about hatred of other people, but in certain extreme situations it could border on hatred, just realizing how much you don't get on with someone. And even when you're dealing with people who in the past you've had good connections with, I think the Venus-Mars opposition may be quite troubling. And it might be a situation, for example, where you're stubborn, someone else is stubborn, and the question is, where does it go from there? It's like you've suddenly hit an obstacle in your dealings with another person. You perhaps were working well together, but suddenly there's an important issue has come up, and you just see it in a completely different way. And this Venus-Mars opposition may crystallize around the personality of one person. So there may be one person in your life who is important. Okay, they may not be important all the time, but for the moment they're important. And just right now, they are in your way. You don't appreciate them, you don't like them. At least you don't like them at the moment. And so you have to work out how best to deal with the situation. And I just don't think it's really a situation where you can just accept your differences. I think it's almost a situation where one person is wrong, one person is right. One person has to give in, one person doesn't. It may be even zero sum. One person wins, one person loses. And ideally, you don't want it to get to that stage. So Taurus, try to think ahead. And if you can see that you and someone else don't get on, then it may just be best to think about something else. And once the Venus-Mars opposition is past peak, in other words, today it's past peak, but over the next few days, the Venus-Mars opposition will be losing its strength. Once that has happened, then I think that things should calm down. I should also point out that the moon is opposition true black moon Lilith, and with moon opposition true black moon Lilith, moon in Taurus, true black moon Lilith in Scorpio, that is not going to help things in terms of other people either. There may be resentments there, and it may be people having festering resentments, and you can perhaps see another person's dark side for the first time. You can see it in a way that is very vivid. Because just because someone's got a dark side doesn't really mean to say that you should avoid them. Everyone's got a dark side. Just remember that. And finally, Moon is sextile Saturn, and Moon sextile Saturn it's a fortunate aspect, and it allows you to get a grip, to sort of take control of things. And if you are feeling that the tension levels are getting too much, that Moon sextile Saturn does allow you to kind of get things in perspective. And I think that perhaps the best way of using Moon sextile Saturn is to use it in a social sense, but not to just focus on particular individuals, perhaps being in a group rather than in a one-to-one situation will somehow be relaxing and stabilizing, and maybe that's how you should work today. So it's not a day where you have to be alone, and it's not a day where you should spend too much time with any one person, but if you spend time with a group of people, then I think that will ensure that things don't get too tense. Gemini, the moon is moving through Taurus all day, and that means perhaps that there's not a great deal that you absolutely have to do. You know, when the moon is in Taurus for Geminis, it's often a time when you feel that you don't have to be at the center of attention. You can keep a lower profile than usual. I mean, Geminis don't always keep a low profile, but today I think that might be what you want to do. I mean, is there really anything you absolutely have to do? And maybe the important things in your life can be done in your own way, at your own time, at your own pace, and that should be how it should work. And you know, that way you can, I suppose, stay out of trouble. Though the moon is sextile Saturn, and I think that moon sextile Saturn could allow you to do some useful work, and that work somehow relates to your ambitions. So you're thinking about what you're trying to achieve and where you are in the process of achievement. And you know, achievement requires different approaches at different times, and yet sometimes you've got to be out there in the open, making sure that everyone can see and hear you. But there are other times, I think like now, where the work you need to do in order to achieve your goals, whatever those goals might be, is best done in a way that is quite private. You know, some things can't be done in a team. It's just impossible. And if you try to do them in a team or even in a partnership, it's just not going to work. And you're the one that knows how it all fits together, and really that is the way it should be. And the main aspect today, the most important aspect today, by the way, I think is a opposition aspect between Venus and Mars. And you know, this Venus-Mars aspect does affect some signs more than others. I don't think the Venus-Mars aspect has a direct impact on you, but I think you might still feel it, and I think that Venus-Mars opposition does represent interpersonal tension, and it's not easy to get on with people, and you're aware of the differences between people. You know, Gemini as a sign is very good at noticing differences. Gemini very often likes to create differences, and because it's part of the categorization process, and that's Geminis are quite into that, because Gemini is a two-bodied sign. It likes to see things in terms of A and B, black and white, light and dark. Gemini can work like this, and perhaps this Venus-Mars opposition is encouraging you to do that. And this might relate, for example, to what you believe in and the support you get for what you believe in, and you know, thinking that some people are good, some people are bad, and it kind of depends on the situation, doesn't it? And certainly me, with my sun in Gemini, I kind of do it all the time. I mean, maybe you notice this in in my readings, I try to be objective in terms of how I look at horoscopes and how I comment on things politically. And sometimes I succeed and sometimes I don't. But of course, I have opinions, and I do see things very often in very simple terms, good and bad. And when you're looking at things in terms of good and bad, you can take people who may be complete monsters, but in terms of having to work them through into a philosophy, you kind of you ignore what's bad about them so that they just fit in. Anyway, with this Venus-Mars opposition, I think that you're perhaps more inclined to see things in terms of good and bad than usual, and it may be that there's a certain element of projection there. I mean, you might be turning people into monsters who are not monsters, and thinking that some people are better than they actually are. But maybe with this Venus-Mars opposition, you should take the view that it's not your. Sorry about my phone. I gave myself a shock just then. I think my volume is on maximum there. Anyway, and I, of course, should put my phone on airplane mode. And so Gemini, I was just saying that try not to see things in terms of good and bad too much, and try to take a more nuanced approach if you can. And, going back to what I was originally saying, you don't necessarily have to be involved. And I think you'll be happiest when you're doing things alone, when you're not feeling that you're getting a lot of attention. Because, anyway, other people are just not going to make things easier for you today, I don't think. Cancer. It's a day when I think you're going to be trying your hardest, I think, to be sociable and to be friendly, and I think you can be successful. I mean, I'm not talking about anything dramatic, but there is something about you that is very sort of grounding and down to earth, and I think people are going to appreciate you. They'll appreciate your presence, and they'll like having you around. And I think that also you can be a positive influence, and you're helped by the fact that the moon is sextile Saturn. So the moon, in a way, moon in Taurus represents you, and Saturn maybe represents other people. And so there is a broad sympathy, I think, between you and others, and you have a sense of mutual understanding and also an awareness of what's going on out there, and you might feel then that this is a chance to get together with people in order to maybe make the most of perhaps a difficult situation. Not difficult for you, but just difficult in general, because it is quite a stressful day. Again, not stressful for you personally, but I think overall it's a stressful day. And so, the more support you and other people can give each other, the better. And so that goes back to Moon sextile Saturn, taking control of things, not being overwhelmed by them. And so if you, for whatever reason, feel that you haven't got enough power or strength to get things done, I think it's going to be very easy to call on another person for help and advice. I think it works the other way. If anyone is in difficulty and doesn't know what to do, you'll be just a person to make things better and to perhaps come up with some good ideas. And so, that is positive. Now, if you are in Australia or New Zealand, it might be slightly different, because we looked at a chart of for Sydney for noon for noon today, and the moon was making a square to Mars and a square to Venus. It was making this T square, and moon square Venus and Mars that is tense, and moon square Mars can be a little bit angry, and so with that moon square Mars, the anger could be real. It may not be your anger, it may be perhaps someone else's anger, but certain people seem to be annoyed. Now, if you're not in Australia or New Zealand, if you're in the Americas in particular, I don't think that's such an issue. And I think if you are in the Americas, what's more important is perhaps that moon sextile Saturn that I have just been talking about. Now, this doesn't change the fact that Venus and Mars are making an opposition today. And this Venus-Mars opposition is important to all of us, regardless of what one's sign is. And this Venus-Mars opposition, it is falling across the finance axis of your chart. That's one way of looking at it. And this might suggest that, when it comes to money, there might be disagreements. So when you're really talking to people about money, when you're really getting to grips with financial issues, if that's what you're doing, then you might realize that you and another person don't completely see eye to eye, and it may be very difficult to work things through. And I think you might be actually quick to get annoyed when money matters start to come up. So if possible, I would have said that financial matters should be avoided. Now, this Venus-Mars opposition could also be linked to relationships, because Venus is in Aquarius, and Venus being in Aquarius, it's quite an emotional placement in the Cancerian chart, and then Venus is opposition Mars, and so in terms of close relationships, this might be suggestive of quite deep, powerful emotions coming to the surface, and it's perhaps been brewing for some time. And so if you are close to someone, and particularly if there have been recent disagreements and recent dramas, this Venus-Mars opposition might suddenly make itself felt, and it could be very powerful, very compulsive, and in one sense it's about attraction. You start to realize perhaps that you are attracted to someone, but it can also so quickly switch to the opposite, and you can see the things about another person that you really can't stand. So this is a kind of contradictory message that Venus-Mars opposition is giving. And so I think you have to be a little bit careful with it, and you perhaps have to decide whether or not you want to actually confront it. And if you don't want to confront it, then Cancer, I think it's very important that you keep things as simple as possible, and you avoid anything that is emotionally complicated. And money and emotion can be closely linked. I mean, I suppose maybe money can be a surrogate, particularly in relationships, for deeper incompatibilities. That can be a possibility. I don't want to suggest any incompatibilities. I'm just suggesting that this Venus-Mars opposition could be problematic. But we also have Moon sextile Saturn, and perhaps that's what you should be focusing on. Moon sextile Saturn, it's not a dramatic aspect, but at the same time, it does allow you and another person to find common ground, but it's just important to keep it simple. What you don't want today is complications, especially emotional or financial complications. Leo, Sun is your ruler. Sun is sesquiquadrate Mars. So Sun Mars are making this 135-degree aspect, and I think that this Sun sesquiquadrate Mars is an important aspect. It really does matter, and it can create, I think, some real tension. And you think about it, you've got the Sun, which is your ruler, and it is sesquiquadrate Mars, which is Mars is ruling through your sign. So you can perhaps see the problem there. And with this Sun sesquiquadrate Mars, I think that you're going to be quite focused on yourself. You'll be taking yourself seriously, and you'll, in most cases, I think, want to get your way. And I think you'll be very good at getting your way. But the question is, how are you going to get your way? And there may be a temptation to perhaps use brute force, doing everything you can to make sure that people follow your orders, perhaps, if you're in a position of authority, and you won't take kindly to opposition. But as you can imagine, this is something that you can take too far. And Sun and Mars together, two very positive, masculine planets that can be quite violent. And so with Sun sesquiquadrate Mars, be careful, not just in terms of upsetting people or upsetting yourself, but also be careful on a physical level. Don't do anything that is dangerous, and don't do anything where it's easy for your own inner psychological self to start to sort of project onto the outside world. So if you are doing something that is at all risky, then be extra careful with that sun sesquiquadrate Mars. And inevitably, this is going to have some impact on relationships. It's not just the fact we've got Sun sesquiquadrate Mars, we've got Venus opposition Mars. And so we've got Venus opposition Mars across the main axis of your chart. Mars is in Leo, Venus is in Aquarius. We've got Sun making the semi-square to Venus. We've got Sun making a sesquiquadrate to Mars. So it would be very easy for relationships to get out of hand, especially if it's a relationship where there have been recent problems. And it could be a relationship that is quite new, something that is not necessarily of a romantic nature, but just someone you have to deal with. And with that Sun sesquiquadrate Mars, it just feels that the tension is there. And also you throw in the Venus-Mars opposition as well. The tension is there, and the incompatibilities are close to the surface. And so it's, I think, relatively easy to fall out with people. And so how do you stop yourself falling out with someone? You can only do your best. But what you can do is try not to be too impatient and try to be relaxed. And if you are feeling annoyed, don't feel that you necessarily have to express this annoyance. Now, I've looked at Sun sesquiquadrate Mars in a sort of a fairly negative way, but I suppose we can look at it positively and say, well, look, if you really want to get your way, and it's important for you to get your way, then I think you can. I think that you do actually have a lot of power at your disposal. It's just that I think that there's some danger that this power gets used in the wrong way. But if you can use the power in the right way, then I think it can be a day when you can actually accomplish quite a lot. And I think you might be helped by the fact that the moon is in Taurus. So moon is in Taurus, high-profile sector, high-profile sign in your chart, and the moon in Taurus is sextile Saturn, and so that moon sextile Saturn, Leo, may give you the discipline to focus on what matters, and also to understand that the wrong actions can spoil things, perhaps in a pretty permanent way. So hopefully that moon sextile Saturn will calm you down a bit and allow you to focus on what matters, and will also give you the realization that a certain amount of reasonable behavior is important. Virgo. Virgo moon is very much in Taurus, and I think that that is going to be helpful. It's like I was saying yesterday that the moon is an earth sign, you're an earth sign, and there's a certain spirituality to the sign Taurus. And with the moon in Taurus, you have a connection to perhaps something higher than yourself, and also you have a connection to the earth, to the ground on which you stand. Not the concrete on which you stand, but the ground, the raw, living soil on which you stand. And I think that this connection should make you feel sort of comfortable, and it's good if you feel comfortable and grounded, because in a way that's what people need. I mean, if you're feeling balanced and certain of yourself, then perhaps that's a tranquility that you can transmit to other people, and they seem to need it, because there is a Venus-Mars opposition today, and the Sun is making a sesquiquadrate to Mars. Sun is making a semi-square to Venus, so that tension is palpable. It's very much around you. I don't think it's necessarily part of you, but there's then the question of what can you do to bring everyone down to earth? And I think if you can just be realistic and ideally focus on small things. It's not a day for fixing the world's problems, and that's something you've got to transmit, I think, to other people, because other people may be taking things far too seriously, and you perhaps need to somehow remind them of some just basic home truths, and that could be Virgo at its best. And you'll probably be helped by the fact that the moon is making a sextile to Saturn. Now, Saturn has been in Pisces for some time, since the beginning of 2023. Pisces is, of course, your opposite sign, and sometimes Saturn in Pisces is a problem because it's perhaps made you aware of the power that other people have, or at least you perceive that other people have more power than you. But with that moon sextile Saturn, I think that allows you to develop the right kind of relationship with the right kind of people, and it also allows you to help ground people. And that's what I said at the beginning. It is important to be grounded, and if other people are too crazy, they don't know when to stop. Well, the question is, do you necessarily have to have anything to do with them? I mean, you don't. And another thing, Virgo, today perspective is important, and you have perspective. A lot of other people don't have perspective, and perspective is all about understanding what's important and what is merely trivial. A lot of people are worrying about things that are trivial, that are not necessary, but nonetheless people just get worked up about nothing. And you can see the wider picture. You can understand that all of this arguing and fighting and aggravation, in the grand scheme of things, it's just is all for nothing. It will count for nothing in the end, and that is quite a spiritual realization. And a lot of people perhaps are losing perspective today, but you're not. And it would be really good if you can give other people a sense of perspective. Hopefully they will listen to you and they'll follow your example. If you can't give other people a sense of perspective, Does it matter? Well, it would be better if you could, but the main thing is that you have perspective. And so in that sense, you can be perhaps today an oasis of calm. Libra. Libra, Venus is ruler of your sign, and Venus is under a certain amount of pressure at the moment, and that is because Venus is opposition Mars, and that Venus-Mars opposition is exact today, and also Venus is making a semi-square to the Sun. I mean, that semi-square to the Sun was exact yesterday, but it's still very much in operation because the Sun and Venus are moving at the same speed, and so, or pretty much the same speed. Venus is moving ever so slightly faster than the Sun, at least from the Earth's perspective. But with that Sun semi-square Venus, there is a lack of comfort here, and so the Sun and Mars, these very positive, dynamic planets, are not being helpful. It may feel that your peace of mind is being undermined, and it's just too much action. People are being just too frenetic, and I may even feel that some people are looking for a fight, looking for an argument, and it may be made more difficult if you try to take people at face value. You know, being a Libran, what you might try to do is create some balance. So if someone is complaining or being a nuisance, you may try to respond in a reasonable way, and then they change their approach, perhaps become more difficult in other ways, and you keep trying to respond. It just becomes exhausting. And Libra, that is not really something you can do. And I think that if you see unpleasantness around you, aggravation around you, you don't have to take responsibility for it. It's not you. It's not yours. And if it's not yours, you shouldn't be upset by it. And certainly what you don't want to do is endlessly try to rebalance, because if you endlessly try to rebalance, you'll be rebalancing forever and you'll just get nowhere, and you will feel exhausted, and you could be overwhelmed. So perhaps, Libra, you have to start the day being very clear about what you want and how you want things to run, and then just stick with it and be stubborn about it. And with Venus in Aquarius, Venus your ruler in Aquarius, a fixed sign, that is something you can do. And perhaps you should commit to something inspirational or creative, and you're going to say, well, this is what you're going to do, and you're not going to let anyone get in your way. And perhaps what you shouldn't do is compromise. Compromise is something that Librans often do, but I don't think today is a day for compromising, however great the pressure. And in terms of relationships, Venus and Mars are opposition today. Mars is ruler of Aries, your opposite sign, so that Venus-Mars opposition can be very much about relationships. And it could be about the awareness that there is a potential conflict, that someone else wants things done their way. Someone else perhaps is not appreciative of you and your individual needs. And so under that situation, I think you have to be strong, because if you start to get involved in a discussion or an argument today, it's very likely you're going to lose. So in that situation, don't get involved. Leave the argument for later. Leave it until you're in a stronger position. And then I think that you'll be you'll be able to, maybe you'll be able to get your way. Maybe there's a possibility of a compromise, but not at the moment. And so be very firm and be tough with other people and be tough with yourself. And, if you don't want a conflict, then perhaps just stay out of other people's way and don't feel that you can avoid a conflict by compromise or by doing what someone says or being very agreeable, because that's just the thin end of a wedge, and you'll end up getting frustrated, and that could lead to more conflicts. And no, that's not something you want. So Libra, I think it's just a day when you really need to look after yourself and you need to put yourself first. Scorpio, the difference between you and other people does seem to be quite apparent today. And this could be a problem. I mean, the reason is, we've got this Venus opposition Mars. I've been talking about this endlessly recently, but it's now exact. And, with Venus opposition Mars, you do have to be careful, because the things you do could just make things a whole lot worse. And there is a certain danger, Scorpio, that you are unreasonable. I know you might think you're reasonable, but you're capable of being unreasonable. And with Venus opposition Mars, you may feel that you're in the right and that someone else is in the wrong. And you might even want to push the point. And I think if you try to push the point, then you're just going to be creating a lot of trouble. And it's not enough to be right. You have to consider a general sense of harmony. Are you perhaps totally wrecking the harmony in your obsession with being right or with getting your way? So really try to look at yourself and look at the impact you're having, because in many cases the impact you're having may not be particularly constructive, and the situation is not helped by the fact that the Sun is making a sesquiquadrate to Mars. At least it may not be helpful. I think the Sun sesquiquadrate Mars, I think in most cases, is just going to encourage you to put huge amounts of energy into one thing that you've decided is important, Sun sesquiquadrate Mars. And there is a certain anger to Sun sesquiquadrate Mars, and there are things you just might get angry about, and once you get angry about things, it's going to be difficult to calm down. And so you do have to make some effort to step back, especially with the fact that the moon is in Taurus. The moon is in Taurus. The moon is in your opposite sign. So with the moon in Taurus, other people do matter, but moon in Taurus is a fixed sign. It's quite stubborn, and your actions affect them. And so really try hard to be reasonable, and do consider the ways in which you can make things worse. That moon in Taurus is opposition true black moon Lilith. So we've got true black moon Lilith in Scorpio, and true black moon Lilith in Scorpio may say something about you. It may say something about the things you are hiding, and it may say something about your resentments. And do think about your resentments, why you might resent people, and perhaps things from the past that you resent, that you hold on to, that you're not prepared to forgive. And make sure that things from the past, which may have been very real a few years ago or a few decades ago, make sure those things that used to be real don't interfere with the reality now, today, December the 12th, 2024. And so perhaps with that moon opposition, true black moon Lilith, there may be a sense in which you have to manage the past. So far, Scorpio, I've been pretty negative, and so I think we do need to think about what are the positive aspects of today. And, okay, there is a sesquiquadrate between the Sun and Mars, and it's certainly a very dynamic aspect. And it means that the power of the Sun is available to you, to Mars, and Mars is in Leo, and so Mars is ruled by the Sun, and so the Sun is sesquiquadrate Mars. So rather than think of sesquiquadrate as a bad aspect, perhaps we just need to think about it as an aspect. And so Sun sesquiquadrate Mars does represent power. And it's true that there are many, many ways today in which you can misuse your power or focus it in the wrong directions, the wrong places. But there is, I'm sure, at least one place where you can use your power. And if you get that place right, if you get that priority right, then Scorpio, you can really accomplish a great deal. I would guess that power does relate to your ambitions and to be thinking about the future, the kind of future that you want to create for yourself. And try to distance it from the past. Don't think about resentments. Don't think about what went wrong in the past. It's not about other people. It's not about getting the better of other people. It's just about getting your way, but in such a way that no one else gets damaged. So focus on what is important with that Sun sesquiquadrate Mars. You know, use your feelings to work out where it is, and just make sure no one gets in your way, that it's not about getting the better of anyone. It's just deciding what matters and then giving it everything you've got. And if you can do that, if you can find the right place for your power, and it may be about just finding the right key. It's like you're looking for something. Different keys, they don't fit the lock, but once you do get the match right, when you've found the right focus, then you could say that of all the 12 signs, you are the most powerful. Sagittarius, it's a day when I think that you are trying to hold things together. So, you know, over the last couple of days, when I've done reading for Sagittarius, I think I've been pretty positive, and I've tried to see things in the best possible light, because I think it is a time when Sagittarians are trying to make an impact and are very often being successful. But it could all become too much of a good thing, and maybe that's what today is about. And yeah, maybe you do need to get a certain sense of perspective, and you maybe, at least for today, need to slow things down a little. Things have just gone a bit too fast, and now is a time to make sure that things are running smoothly. And you know, perhaps it's like you've got a machine that's been working really well. It's been working for a long time very well. And now's a time to make sure that the machine really is in good working order, to sort of check the moving parts, because you don't want something to overheat. And so slowing things down, having a look at everything, ensuring that something hasn't got out of hand, I think would be very important. And so, you know, don't be afraid, for example, of just looking at the details of things. You know, asking yourself whether you've really got things right. And, you know, remember, Jupiter, your ruler, is going retrograde. And so in general, with Jupiter moving retrograde, it's a time when you're perhaps going back over old ground, and sometimes it's more important than others to go back over that ground. And I think that is something that you actually can do, or indeed should be doing. And we'd also, Moon is sextile Saturn. Moon sextile Saturn is a useful aspect, but it's not very exciting. And Moon sextile Saturn is perhaps just about staying in one place and making sure that everything is in order, and also not being tempted to go too far. And that's not something you want to do. I mean, there are aspects you could get involved with, but perhaps you don't want to get involved with them. And I'm thinking particularly of that Sun sesquiquadrate Mars. So the Sun is in Sagittarius. The Sun is obviously in your sign. It's the Sagittarius season. But the Sun is making a sesquiquadrate to Mars. And that Sun sesquiquadrate Mars may be about the temptation to do something that is somewhat larger than life, is dramatic, and requires a lot of energy and effort. It's for temptation. It's a possibility. But maybe today, Sagittarius, you'll take the view that that's not for you. This is an opportunity that you might want to miss out on, because maybe you'll look at the risks and the rewards and you'll decide that the risks are just too much. And besides, I think that right now you probably feel that you need a little bit of peace and quiet, because I think that you are in danger of overdoing things. And if you were to embrace the Sun sesquiquadrate Mars, you might have an opportunity to go on some kind of adventure or to do something new and apparently exciting. The opportunity might be there. Part of you, as Sagittarius the explorer, might feel that that's the right thing to do, but I'm not convinced. I think that perhaps you should leave it to other people. Maybe not even leave it to other people. Perhaps suggest to other people that it's a tense day and everyone needs to be looking after themselves. Capricorn. Capricorn, if you have been listening to my forecasts for the 12 signs, you might perhaps have noticed that in places I have been a bit negative. And the reason I've been negative is because I think that there is a lot going on today, and a lot of what's going on today isn't necessarily very positive. I've talked about the Venus being opposition Mars. I've talked about the Sun being sesquiquadrate Mars as well. And none of this really needs to have an impact on you. It's kind of not your problem. And so I suppose you can watch what other people are doing, let them try it out first, see what happens, then you can make your own decision. Or you can just do things your own way. And you are in a period of time at the moment, it's not going to last forever, but it's just a period of time when you yourself are under less pressure than other people. You're the calm one. And you're calm, and you also have a good sense of what's possible and what's possible in your own life. And you're able to do things which you're good at, and you can do them well. And with the Moon making a sextile to Saturn, I think that you're clever, but not too clever. And whatever you're doing, you're doing a good job. And I think you are appreciated for this, not in a dramatic way. It today might be dramatic for others, but I don't think it's dramatic for you. And so with Moon sextile Saturn, you can be a calming influence on others, and I think other people to an extent can be a calming influence on you. And I think perhaps what we should be looking for today in the Capricorn life is sort of gentle enjoyment, gently doing something that you're good at, that allows you to bring into play your creativity, but it's not about frenetic action. And so if you're the calm one, then I suppose you can be useful. If you want to be useful. I mean, some people out there are a bit crazy. Are you able to rein them in? It might be tempting to. It might be tempting to have an impact. It might be tempting to feel that things aren't going well. Not for you, I must make that clear, but in other parts of your community or wherever you are, wherever your sphere of interest is, there are things perhaps not going well. You might feel a certain sense that you have an obligation to do something, to say something, and maybe that obligation is real, but I don't think today you want to put yourself out too much. I think that is the wrong thing to be doing. I think that you should be focusing on your own interests, and perhaps if there's chaos out there, maybe people have just made up their own mind. People are running things in their own way, and they're not going to listen to you anyway. So why bother? Just look after your own interests and don't feel too guilty about it. Aquarius. If you've been following what I've been saying for the 12 signs, you will have perhaps gathered that in some ways it is a rather difficult day. And it's because of this Venus-Mars opposition, and you've got the Sun making semi-squares and sesquiquadrate to it. We've got Sun semi-square Venus, we've got Sun sesquiquadrate Mars. So it's this wider sort of configuration, but I will be talking in detail about it at the end of this video. But it is having an influence on you, and we've got this Venus-Mars opposition, Venus in Aquarius, Venus in your sign, opposition Mars, and we've got the Sun is making a semi-square to Venus, and Sun making that sesquiquadrate to Mars. It just makes things difficult. And in terms of that Venus in Aquarius, I mean, if we look at Venus in Aquarius in a pure form, it's kind of nice to have Venus in Aquarius. Venus in Aquarius has, I think, made you, or is making you, a sort of more reasonable person. I think it sort of emphasizes your social skills and how you're coming across. You're coming across as an interesting and perhaps inventive person with good ideas. Yet that Venus is under pressure. Venus opposition Mars. It may feel, Aquarius, that not everyone appreciates you. You try to be yourself, and yet you might feel that you're getting something of a negative reaction. Maybe people don't like it when you're too independent-minded, or it may just be something about you that irritates other people. It may be nothing to do with being independent-minded. It's just a question of chemistry. And chemistry may be something that is really difficult to find at the moment because there's too much conflict around. So don't assume that the chemistry is always going to be wonderful. And be aware of, where things might go wrong. And, if you're an Aquarius, but of course you are an Aquarius, it's a sign which is rational. You use your intellect, you use your reason, and sometimes that's not good enough. Maybe there are emotional subtleties that you just miss out on. And that may be part of what's going on at the moment. It may be that emotionally you can't pick up on things well enough and you misjudge a situation, and perhaps you get involved with someone who you thought was going to be okay, but they're not okay, and they cause trouble for you. So I think in terms of other people, I think caution would be a good idea. You can't make assumptions. Just because you're being reasonable doesn't mean that the other person is going to be reasonable. And we've also got the Sun making a semi-square to Venus. So Venus in Aquarius gets this semi-square to the Sun. The Sun does rule your opposite sign of Leo. So that Sun semi-square Venus could make relationships difficult. Again, another reason why things might not work out. So I think relationships are an area that have to be negotiated and navigated very carefully, and it may be the case that if you possibly can, that you should avoid getting too close to anyone. And that applies, I think, not just on a sort of a one-to-one level, but sort of in terms of the group, the crowd, on a social level, there could still be problems. And so I think that it may be a day when you should perhaps fall back on your own resources, because once you fall back on your own resources, the irritations do start to disappear. What have you got to worry about? If there's no connection with other people, whether it's face-to-face or on the phone, then everything should go fine. And the moon is making a sextile to Saturn. And Saturn is your ruler. Moon is in Taurus, which is the sign of the moon's exaltation. So moon sextile Saturn can actually be calming. It can be reassuring. It's about feeling safe and feeling that you've just got everything under control. And that's the way it should be. And so, yes, there's a lot of stuff going on around you, but it needn't impact you, provided you go about things in the right way. And that means, I think, in most cases, that is about falling back on your own resources, not feeling that you're reliant on anyone. If someone asks you to meet up with them or to do something perhaps of a social nature, it might sound exciting, but in the end, it's not going to be worth the effort. I don't think it's not going to be worth the aggravation. Pisces, it's potentially a difficult day in the sense that it could be difficult for everyone. It's nothing specific to Pisces. Today is tense. And, we do have this Sun sesquiquadrate Mars. And the Sun is in Sagittarius. It's in a high-profile part of your chart. So with Sun sesquiquadrate Mars, there is a possibility that you have a disagreement. And that would depend on what you're doing. So, if you stay at home and you don't mix with people, then that Sun sesquiquadrate Mars is not necessarily going to manifest. On the other hand, if you do something that is very high profile, and you, for example, if you're going into work, for example, then that Sun sesquiquadrate Mars is likely to manifest. And that Sun sesquiquadrate Mars might represent a disagreement, perhaps a disagreement with an authority figure. And the disagreement might be about something that is utterly trivial. Some little detail that you as a Pisces don't really want to bother with. It's not interesting, it's not important, and it's ridiculous that anyone could be worried about it, but someone could be worried about it. And so even if you feel that details don't matter, I think that you probably should be taking them seriously. And so make sure things are as perfect as possible if you're having to deal with other people, if you're particularly dealing with authority figures. And that's not just in terms of career and work. It could be authority figures within the family. So if members of your family have in the past been sticklers for detail, have got obsessed about small things, then today they could be especially obsessed about small things. And so the best you can do is to just make sure that everything looks good, at least on the surface. And you can sort of keep your fingers crossed and hope that no one notices, and that it's just good enough until this Sun sesquiquadrate Mars has passed. Now, this Sun sesquiquadrate Mars needn't be a bad thing, provided you take control of it, and maybe this is what it's about. So you've got this energy represented by Sun sesquiquadrate Mars. And I must emphasize, I regard sesquiquadrates as being a really important aspect. Arguably more important than a trine, certainly more important than a sextile. And the Sun sesquiquadrate Mars could go in one of two ways. It could go in a difficult way, as I've just suggested. It may be about someone else taking control of this aspect and using it perhaps to undermine you. Or it could be you taking control of it. The Sun sesquiquadrate Mars, Sun in Sagittarius, it's about you being very definite about what you want, and perhaps in certain situations it might be a sense of attack first before the other person does. I suppose if you want to look at it in geopolitical terms, I mean, it's not a very nice way of looking at it. It may be about the first strike. So, in terms of nuclear doctrine, there is the first strike doctrine, isn't it? But if you use your nuclear weapons first, what you're trying to do is you're trying to devastate the enemy, including their nuclear capacity, before they can get back at you. And so that is an approach to perhaps even winning a nuclear war. And so in terms of your actions, maybe you should take a first strike approach. Now, I'm not advocating that you attack anyone. Please look at this in a sort of a symbolic level, But if you are in a conflict situation and you know that the other person is going to try to get at you, and they're going to try to sort of put you down, or they're going to try to attack you or criticize you, then you should get in there first. Do the attacking, do the criticizing, be the first one to do it. And that might be a way to win. I mean, I understand it's not a very nice thing to say, but it's perhaps one way in which you might be able to use that Sun sesquiquadrate Mars. And in general, don't allow other people to take the initiative. It might be easiest if you're a Pisces to just wait, but I don't think so. Always be the one to take an initiative. That initiative might not be aggressive. It's just you making a suggestion. Rather than wait for someone else to make a suggestion, you make the suggestion. And if you make the suggestion, that means that you are in control, because sometimes you make the suggestion, someone follows that suggestion, and everything goes your way. And perhaps that's the way it should be. And now it's time to look at today from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Thursday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 21. This is a hexagram I think we've had quite recently, biting through. And biting through, we have the symbolism here of a hard piece of metal, might be gold, which is, I suppose metal is hard by definition, but this piece of metal that is surrounded by something. It may be surrounded by leather or something, and we have to get through to it. And that gold might represent the better side to another person's personality. That's one way of looking at it. And biting through is about justice and administering justice, and perhaps dealing with people who are not behaving well. And I think that if you've been looking at what's been going on astrologically today with the Sun sesquiquadrate Mars, Venus opposition Mars, I think a lot of people today have been behaving badly. And because I think there's a lot of egos flying around, people are very into being right, they want to be right, and so what do we do about the situation? We need to take control of the situation, and administering justice, I mean, it's difficult for ordinary people to administer justice, but perhaps in our local way, we are perhaps being called on to administer justice. Biting through is about trying to find the goodness in other people, regardless of how badly they're behaving. And I think there is a lot of scope for bad behavior, as I've just said. We perhaps have to somehow see what we can do to change people's behavior. It may be that we just have to suggest that someone's doing something wrong, or give them an alternative view. And the fifth line moves, and the fifth line is saying that in terms of our efforts to create change, and perhaps to change other people, we can be successful up to a point. And it's maybe even saying that we can be lenient up to a point. We can sort of tolerate other people's misdemeanors and unreasonable behavior, but only up to a point. There is a sort of danger here that if we take things too far, then there's a risk of breaking our teeth because it's biting through. Now, sometimes with the I Ching, we have to be literal. And there is a suggestion of breaking teeth here. So if you are eating anything today, I mean, this is nothing to do with justice or anything. If you happen to be eating anything today, do check it for rocks, like, I don't know, cherry pits, whatever it could be that might break your teeth. So hard things in your food. So today, check what you're eating really, really carefully. Don't bite down on things too hard, because broken teeth do come up. And it's not inevitable that you're going to break your teeth today. Just look after your teeth and make sure that you're not chewing and biting down onto something that could cause you thousands of dollars or pounds worth of damage in dental repair. That's not something we want. But anyway, so you need to be reasonable and be lenient up to a point. But yeah, don't take things too far. Because if you do take things too far, yeah, you could break your teeth. But the I Ching was, of course, using it in a fairly symbolic way. And so we need to know when to stop. We need to know where our limit is. And then we have the fifth line moving. And with the fifth line moving, that means that we move to a different hexagram. And we move to something rather different. We move to 25. Innocence, this is another hexagram that we've had quite recently. And so perhaps once we have sorted out the mess, and I think there is a bit of a mess around today, I think certainly in terms of other people's behaviour, once we've sorted that out, I think we can be more relaxed, and we don't have to have any expectations. It's very important of innocence not to have expectations. So by the end of the day, we might feel somewhat sort of world weary, and perhaps there's a sense of resignation. This is the world in which we live, and it's not great. And yeah, we don't expect anything. But then we might be surprised. And I think we might be surprised to the upside. And then we have to consider the astrology again. And, as I've been saying, astrologically, things are a little bit difficult today. And so let me show you what I mean. And so we have Sun sesquiquadrate Mars. So this is the moment that the Sun is sesquiquadrate Mars. It's at 12:11 p.m. London time. So that's going to be that's 11 minutes past midday London time. So that would be 11 minutes past 7 in the morning in New York, or 11 minutes past 4 in the morning in California, or 11 minutes past 1 in the afternoon in Paris, in Australia, New Zealand. That would be this evening. I think maybe in New Zealand it might be after midnight, and into Friday. So there we can see it. Sun, Mars, sesquiquadrate. When two planets are sesquiquadrate, remember they're always just their degrees are always going to be exactly 15 degrees different. So you take Mars at 558 Leo, you add 15 onto that, 2050, turn that into 2058, and then you make it mutable, and there you have that Sun sesquiquadrate Mars, and it links up with Venus as well. So there is Venus. So Venus is at 6 degrees to Aquarius. Mars is at 5 degrees 58 Leo, and there's the Sun. So you can see that they're very tied up with one another. And so Sun and Mars is a very aggressive pair, I would have said. Masculine energy, quite violent, very positive, wanting things to happen. And, it can often be associated with accidents and explosions and just things going wrong. Fire, electrical accidents. So these are all things we have to be careful about. And that Venus opposition Mars. How do we see Venus? Well, it could be saying something about relationships. Relationships could be tense, although Venus might just be acting as a trigger. It's just putting more emphasis on Sun sesquiquadrate Mars. And I suppose we could do some astrocartography by taking the exact moment of that sesquiquadrate and looking at how different places are impacted by it. This is the astrocartography for London. I've set this chart for London. So in London, you can see that Saturn is close to the midheaven, and Saturn is close to the ascendant. The Sun is close to the midheaven. So it's not great. It looks tense, but the thing about England is always tense, isn't it? Recently it's never ending. And I will be looking at Starmer's chart in a moment, by the way. And Jupiter is square the ascendant. So as always, is it going to be a happy Christmas in the UK? Well, probably not. Every Christmas is happy to an extent, but at least in terms of the government and how the nation feels about itself, it does not seem great. But maybe I'm just stating the obvious there. And we can see some midpoints here. The Sun ascendant midpoint is on the Saturn midheaven midpoint, and that's all tied up with Mars. So it's not great in the UK, I would not have said. Now let's just look at the astrocartography for that. Let's look at you could use. Whoops. So you can see here this red line. These are all the places where Sun is on the midheaven, and so in other words, all the places that Mars will also be sesquiquadrating in midheaven. And you can see this goes through the British Isles, it goes through Scotland. I think it affects the British Isles in general. I think that it affects, I would have said it affects Ireland just as much as it does as much as it does the UK. So this is something impacting the British Isles, and could be some issues in Spain. I don't know what's happening in Spain. Maybe I should look at the chart for Madrid. Might be somewhere to focus on as well. So those are the places that really sort of stand to mind. Beijing, maybe. Let's I don't know if you can see Beijing. I need to sort of move this over so you can see what I mean with Beijing. So there is, I think that is Beijing. So we might want to look at that. So let's just let's look at let's reset this chart for Madrid, for example. Madrid in Spain. So you can see if we take this Sun-Mars sesquiquadrate and we set it for Madrid, the capital of Spain, we can see that as in Britain, Saturn is on the ascendant and the Sun is on the midheaven, but it's closer in Madrid. So it may be that Madrid is, and Spain is under Spain as a rule, because Madrid is obviously the capital, so this might be a place to look at. I mean, I know we just had our floods in Spain. I don't know, I'm not following Spanish politics, but it may be that aside from Britain and Ireland, which I think could be affected by the Sun sesquiquadrate Mars, I think Spain could be. And another place one might want to look at is Beijing. This is very hit and miss. I always make this point. You take an astrological aspect and you set it for a location and you try and see if anything happens in this location. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. But so again, I'm not following what's happening in China. So this is the Sun sesquiquadrate Mars set for China. You see Mars is exactly on the ascendant and the Sun is sesquiquadrate Mars, and Venus is also Venus is on the descendant. So Britain, Ireland, Spain, China, these are four possible countries that might be especially impacted by it. And so let's now look at a few people who may be impacted by this. Famous people. Some of these people I've looked at recently. So I'll start with Anthony Albanese, who I think is still the Prime Minister of Australia. And so Anthony Albanese, again, I don't know anything about him. I don't know anything about Australian politics. I don't. And you'll notice that Anthony Albanese has his Mars at 642 Leo. So he's just had Mars going stationary retrograde at 610 Leo. So Mars was right on his Mars. So he's just had that. I don't know what's going on in his life. I know that there was some scandal about him getting free plane tickets, but maybe there's more stuff brewing. And it's not just the fact that he has got a Mars return. It's also the fact that what's happening is that the Sun is starting to move towards a sesquiquadrate with his Mars. So the Sun up here at 21 Sagittarius is making the sesquiquadrate Mars. Plus he's going to have Venus opposition his Mars. So his Mars is strongly activated. And I suppose Mars in Leo, I suppose you might think of someone who has a high opinion of himself and likes to do things his own way, and that is under pressure. He might make a mistake. Maybe he might be over impulsive. So Anthony Albanese might be someone who you might want to consider. Now, the British royal family. Oh, actually, before looking at the British royal family, I've talked about Anthony Albanese. I think I'll actually talk about Pierre Poilievre, who is the leader of the opposition in Canada. And in his chart, he's got Mars conjunct his Jupiter. I'm not saying that this is a hugely important aspect, but Mars is coming back towards his Jupiter, and then he's going to have Sun sesquiquadrate his Jupiter. He's going to have Venus opposition his Jupiter. Now, I don't have a time of birth for Pierre Poilievre, so maybe that Jupiter is going to sort of manifest in some way. I suppose Jupiter in Leo represents his ambitions and what he wants to do. And I suppose he wants to be Canadian Prime Minister. He wants to take over from Justin Trudeau. And it may be that this Sun-Mars-Venus configuration is going to encourage him to sort of do something new, to assert himself, to assert his power. So that is a possibility. Now, the British royal family are, I believe, going to be under a certain amount of pressure with this. So here's King Charles's chart. And so King Charles has his ascendant at 5 degrees 24 Leo. He's also got Mercury at 6:57 Scorpio. He's got his north node here. So this early fixed part of the chart, 5 Leo, north node at 4:58 Taurus, south node at 4:58 Scorpio, and then a descendant obviously at 5:24 Aquarius. Mars is crossing his ascendant, and the Sun has just finished making a sesquiquadrate to his ascendant. And in fact, the Sun, I mean, look at Prince Charles's Mars. So, in fact, let's compare Prince Charles's chart with this Sun sesquiquadrate Mars to really illustrate the point. So that Sun is exactly on Prince Charles's Mars, exactly there. So his Mars is under a huge amount of pressure here, and his Mars is hitting the ascendant as well. So I don't know. That does not look good for Prince Charles, King Charles, sorry. So I don't know what it is, but it's not good, and I don't know whether we'll find out about it, because he may be King of England, King of the UK, King of Britain, whatever, but we don't know everything that's happening in his life. But if I were to advise him, I would have said, be very careful. I don't know. And of course it may say something about the country, because King Charles, even though he's only a constitutional monarch, symbolically he is the head of state. And so with that aspect, that may say something about what is happening in the country he, in theory, legally rules. And so I think that's a really difficult aspect. And so King Charles is someone we should be looking at, and also the kingdom he rules. And his wife Camilla, she has her ascendant at 4:54 Leo. So Mars is moving, has already crossed her ascendant, and now it's moving back onto her ascendant because Mars is retrograde. And I'm not saying that the Sun sesquiquadrate Mars is going to directly impact her, but the Venus-Mars opposition is across her ascendant. So I think that Camilla is under pressure as well. And also Princess Catherine. So here's Princess Catherine's chart, and it's Princess Catherine's Mercury. So Princess Catherine's Mercury, I mean, I've mentioned her recently, but I think we have to see Princess Catherine's that transit to Princess Catherine's Mercury in the context of what's happening to Charles. And it may just be the royal family are all linked up with something. And so looking at the transit here, we can see that, so she's got Venus exactly on her Mercury. And so Mars is exactly on her Mercury, and the Sun is semi-square her Mercury. So her Mercury, which is Mercury is the way she's thinking about the world, It's, I suppose, her intellect. And her Mercury, by the way, is square Jupiter. So there's something bothering her. And also Mercury is square the midheaven. She's got her 518 Taurus. So she's under pressure. I think certainly she's under a lot of mental pressure. So I think there may be something going on in the royal family here. And from the perspective of British politics, here is Keir Starmer's horoscope. And Keir Starmer has his Saturn at 5 degrees 51 Aquarius. So Keir Starmer has got, there's his Saturn. So he's got Venus on his Saturn. He's got Mars opposition his Saturn, and he's got he's got the Sun semi-square his Saturn. So his Saturn is under a lot of pressure. And Saturn may represent his authority. Now, if you are Prime Minister, your Saturn is going to be important. We don't have a time of birth for him, but Saturn is not going to move much in a 24-hour period. So his Saturn, his authority, his sense of control may be under pressure, perhaps because of events going on in the UK. So that is certainly something to consider. And finally, I just want to go back over the chart, look again at the chart of our old friend Volodymyr Zelensky. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it, how long he's lasted. I mean, it's just incredible, isn't it? I mean, one always writes off Volodymyr Zelensky, but he's just still there, still Ukrainian president. I don't think the Russians are trying to assassinate him or anything. If anyone tries to assassinate him, it will be his own people. I suppose he might accidentally get caught in a missile strike. I think the Russians are going to be doing everything they can to keep him alive, I would have said. But Volodymyr Zelensky does have a Sun-Venus conjunction. At his Venus is at 553 Aquarius, and his Sun is at 5 degrees 7 Aquarius. So that Sun sesquiquadrate Mars and the Venus, it's all hitting his Venus, and it's hitting his Sun as well to some extent. So, Mars is going retrograde. Mars is going to very soon go opposition his Sun again. So more pressure. Is he going to last? I don't know. It's he just keeps on. I mean, he's because he's so fixed, he's so determined, and I mean, maybe this is just keeping him in office. But it's just incredible. It is incredible how long he's lasted. And I believe that Zelensky was inaugurated on May the 20th, 2019. I have 10 a.m. as his inauguration time when he was inaugurated as president, obviously before the war, and at the time of his inauguration, if I've got that 10 o'clock time right, he has got 5 degrees 20 Leo rising. Also, Venus is at 556 Taurus. Venus was certainly at 556 Taurus. And Uranus was at 4 degrees 4 Taurus. So in other words, he was inaugurated as president when Venus was exactly square his natal Venus. And so what's happening now is we've got a Sun sesquiquadrate Mars with Mars square his Venus Venus, Mars square his inauguration Venus, Mars opposition his natal Venus, and Mars square his inauguration Uranus, and Mars potentially on the inauguration as ascendant. So I think this configuration today is going to be putting more pressure on Volodymyr Zelensky. But as I've said, he is very resilient. Okay, that's it. That's all I'm going to say for today. I hope you found this video of some interest. If you did find the video interesting, I'd be really happy if you were to like it. And if you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. Anyway, thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.